us away from dangers right here at home. Screws tightening slowly over democracy and race. Though the inchworm and I are different, I feel at one with it. I felt as one with it, as though we could both become victims in an instant. And while it could do little to protect itself, I realized that I use my words and activism to confront this madness in the world. And perhaps you feel the same, and bring your power to this evening's reading. Community unites us here, and we are glad for it. Our first reader this evening is poet Alex Wells Shapiro. Alex is a poet and artist from the Hudson Valley, living in Chicago. He reads submissions for Frontier Poetry, serves as business and grants manager for another Chicago magazine, and co-curates Exhibit B, a reading series presented by the Guild Literary Complex. You can read his poems in 14 Hills, Word for Word, Fatal Flaw, and Jelly Bucket, among other journals and zines. His debut poetry collection, Insect Architecture, is available from Unbound Edition Press. And I'm going to put that in the chat for everyone. So please welcome Alex Wells Shapiro.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Aggie. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to hearing everybody read. I'm just going to read for straight from the beginning of Insect Architecture until my time's up. My titles are a little bit embedded in the work, and so I'm going to just sort of read them as they are on the page. And if you're intrigued, you'll find out sort of what they're doing on the page in the collection. Yeah. A fable about boxes. A dial tone rumbling off a yellow ranch with a white porch, an ultra-modern black glass Bond villain condo, and a withering blue colonial with the attic puked across the lawn, interspersed among nondescript brick buildings, sandy browns, heavy reds, rosier reds, and cinder block grays connected by wood arteries jutting out their backs. Two delivery people approached the first, each wearing dark colored jumpsuits, bandanas, and gloves at the buzzer of a disfigured gate, adorned with thin spiring barbs, securing a svelte courtyard hemmed by unkempt hedges, leading to dozens of little boxes stacked like an industrial megablock wall. No one's come in or out for 10 minutes. They test their assignments, pinching and poking two hollow, lightly taped cardboard boxes and an envelope laced with a pressed sheet of bubble wrap. The last to arrive has the most to gain. Loading box onto hip and stepping back like a kamehameha and heaving with palms, wrists trailing after with a mass-captured On the rise, the weight of its insides catches a panel and the box flies into the stretch of grass snaked through the walkway's center. A corner thud and a flop to flat, and the worker returns to their route. Deafened and frustrated in the face of the droning buzzer, the earliest goes next. Rocking back on heels, knees stooped, box resting in finger-linked cups, hands dangling underhanded like a granny free throw. Stabilizing pendulum sways, growing and growing until releasing with tender touch on the upswing. The rise and fall are parallel, and the box clips the point of a bar, flipping down the other side and clunking into a lean between overgrowth and the fence, and the worker returns to their route. The lone deliverer remaining compares envelopes and boxes in their head. Grasping contents and coiling arm around waist, opening up like a novice discus thrower. Envelope straight armed back overhead, oscillating in search of a groove, repetition buoying confidence, accelerating to flicking fingertips, and release leading to returning to their root instep. The envelope frisbees, axled by its contents like a copter seed, flat arcing at the door. The crack of its impact is censored by the still blaring, broken buzzer. Onomatopoeia leaking into the unmonitored lobby is reported to the landlord portal by some occupants, thought to be indifferent noise. The deliveries are retrieved when a push notification rustles the occupants' pockets. Dollar Tree Lysol the neighbors left, settled carapace thick atop our sig-stained hallway baptizes my breath. A stripped door frame circulates my ankles. When touch first became unsafe, we shared a blunt in the gutted pub below, and I learned the building was owned by Miss Ali, but is now owned by Stephen Packer, and he seems nice too. Lean wools shifting in candlelight over murmurs and exclamation and vibration. Andre, Stevie Nicks, a Larry Hoover documentary, even songbirds synthesize. Habitually eating the surrounding sand into a moat defined by embankments, disintegrating under the weight of consumer builders' displacement, and heaving coarse chunks back up, wadded just as they drop down, but glossier, and it'll never feel like every grain is flushed from the stomach lining. Preparedness. Between streetlights in a sunken, gated alley, accordion playing, bare arms extending and collapsing their instrument, accompanying a distorted boombox, mosquito lamp sizzling above their ear, my sharp lateral stagger around a hydrant, cap tilt obscuring acknowledgement, melody continuing commingling in sirens, horns, yelps, flecked constellations furnishing the outskirts of our block, occupied by tunneled wind shepherding leaves and litter toward lakefront and their song. Raised skin ebbing supple shrunk to non-confrontational normalcy as I perceive no other in front of me. Clear intersection outlined white through solid rain, lurching into a trot across, tracking skid honk crunch behind me. A tread metal sidewalk cellar door hinge gives in beneath Grandma's concentrated gait, tilting to sliding down concrete stairs against an invisible mushroom cloud of warm rising into winter. Bundled busboys swathe her chattering in dish towels and lean her head on a conveyor belt frame, and spirits steady with stories about home. A bump revealed as a toppled box, a spark leaping off a stovetop to die inches from Mom's eye. Mikey's from Brooklyn too, as is the bassist upstairs, but she lies in the corner of the kitchen nearer the weight rotation than the stage, and she's croaking warning at the stream of legs overhead. Conversation survives as banter when the crew returns to work. No one checked on them that night, despite a door letting in cold, and Graham's alarm and giggling and rambling at odds with music and clomping above. Three fables scaled. The deer disappearing when the second complex rises atop the winding sewage creeks. Yellow eyes speckle what thinning brush is left. Turning, spinning over ice crusting with dusk, parked neighbors shard apart, walling the ponged Buick. Plastic and glass sink into dirty snow. Without vertical force, you can't grip sealed ground. Grasps at hairs, sixes of appendages writhing wild against an accelerating army of droplets, sweating ants off picnicker legs. A toothpick, tipped once with what drew them, precisely skewers thoraces. More swarm. Some ants can swim, but none return to die on the hill they built. Falling foot slips 6 feet into pothole puddle, right toes still touching ripping open street. I'm in pain and I'm wet from the deep stretch, mostly. Commuting. An L door showing my volume disembodied. Can a train with a lump jutting out its sides snake beneath the city? Will friction pop the metal flat? If I can escape implication, I'll also murmur amongst them at the inconvenience. Insides. Receding yields imploding. Everything drains into the spaces between blocks. New tenants, be wary of the wolves. The gaps are artificial membranes holding human development in place. Infrastructure is an exertion of consciousness and thumbs, but the structure within isn't dormant. Our engineering is no more definitive than insect architecture. Erosion massages us toward reconstitution. An example. I have a cousin who moves my shit around when they visit, then tells me they fixed the room. 15's banging out. 15's banging, bass drowning out. We hear the hook. Presence of evicted remains, maintaining spaces they created. Perhaps one day the discharge from our leaking feet will burst from the ground and blossom, but today no rose explodes from concrete. Buzzing means you're not alone. Rolling engine folding, angled up against a pigeon foot, anchored by the sticky pavement. The totality of one milk dud not joining the rest in your teeth's sinking crevices. Usually they move. UFO. Whipping propellers hold a copter hovering in arm's lunge from rooftop lips, breezing at the scrunched faces of a porch-dwelling audience, awestruck at the unmoving intruder overhead. No operator nor logo is visible through the dusk's orange smother on its panes. The touched get ripped from their twigs into the steady twister. The other leaves flop with death metal fervor. 3 fables about controlling the streets. Loop goers raise phones assuming he's the new Batman, hung 16 stories up a tower near 100 high. I don't want to die, he tells Twitter, punctuating his message with a knife, threatening to sever the tense rope connecting him to an observation deck. Emergency response clots the 2-tiered walkway carved riverside at the base, as demands echo off parapets, escaping into pollen, fog, pollution not yet built into, like heat leaving a mug. Neon vest glowing like the sun it's siphoning heat from, flowing atop a sweat-dampened maroon and white poppy-patterned cotton blouse stuck on her teary pores. Taillights, tall and wide like mural eyes, flash her face, the white flowers, the chipped crosswalk lines boxing her into the intersection red, with each cautious brake pump a rhythmic against the bus's warning beeps. The driver is unable to ease their foot off the pedal without shouted, sharp affirmation from 2 of these empty bus lengths down the block above the warnings, the L train, additional beeping, kids at the park, dogs, and a flute, neatly slipping up and down scales that Wendy is still holding the intersection open, spread arms halting bikers and cars and sculpting into detour directions. A 3-point turn into tedious maneuvering, broad wheel nipping the driver's knees, side mirrors nipping side mirrors, dipping branches brushing the roof, route held up by speed bumps and Parker's departures into AM gridlock. Long and boxy, a Crown Victoria bumper with a t-shirt crisp white paint job tediously maneuvers against traffic on a gridlocked residential one-way, smearing its face in scratches and shreds of sticky ripped decal from red hatchbacks, metallic sedans, black and blue minivans, tire-stilted trucks and SUVs, taxis, and a bus rerouted. A cyclist dismounts, heaves vehicle atop helmet, and steps between the teeth of parking to the curb, through 2 ankle-high tree gates, jerking the bike higher to evade rubberneckers' heads before walking it down the road unobstructed. At the intersection, congestion is fed with finger points, directing stagnant drivers, honking irate or in alliance, phones recording or distracting, shouting obscenities or in rhythm, together forced to let the demonstration, a parade of banners, dancing, and song, with 3 people for each vehicle, unified in response to state violence, wash over them. Community must eventually dissemble for rest into pedestrians. Atmosphere popping temples like balloons, using just pressure. These seas, air outlining the scene as reactionary as any body, shift with what they feel. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you all so much for listening to me. Looking forward to listening to the other readers.
Alex, that was wonderful. And I see in the comments in the chat a lot of very, very appreciative comments. So thank you so much. And now I get to introduce a friend of mine, Yasmina Din Madden. So she and I were just talking because we actually were neighbors for a long time. And neither of us had any idea, I think, that the other wanted to be a writer and was like a, fanatical reader and all of that. So anyway, it's such a pleasure I first ran into Yasmina again at an AWP conference. And since then we've been in touch and it's very nice. And so we're really happy to have Yasmina Din Madden here. She is a Vietnamese American writer who lives in Iowa. Her writing has been published or is forthcoming in Electric Literature, the Idaho Review, Pank, Carve, the Masters Review, the Fairy Tale Review, Necessary Fiction, and other journals. Her flash story, The De Facto Mother, won the 2022 Oxford Flash Fiction Prize. And her short fiction has been a finalist for the Iowa Review Award in Fiction. The Masters Review Anthology, that was all one title. So I didn't really sound like that. She is now working on a collection of short fiction and is an associate professor of English at Drake University. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Yasmina Din Madden.
Thanks so much, Natalia. We were probably both too busy smashing our faces into books to realize the other was interested in writing back then, but it's really great to see you. And thanks to Sunday Salon Chicago for hosting this wonderful event. Thank you, Ignatius and Betsy and Natalia. It's really nice to be reading with so many great writers. And I appreciate you're all coming. I see one of my former students in a little square, Gabby. So I'm just shout out to Gabby. Thanks for coming. Okay, so I'm going to read 3 short flash pieces. They're all around 1,000 words. And they have similar tensions. So I thought these might be good as a group. And the first one is called The De Facto Mother. Let me just find it here. Okay. That's not it. Okay, here we go. The De Facto Mother. Kiki learns that male alligators have permanent erections while she watches the Discovery Channel instead of grading 5-paragraph essays from her 8th graders who, among the boys, she also suspects have permanent erections. Over the many years she's taught, she's seen hundreds of boys adjust themselves, eyes darting around the room, checking to see if anyone noticed, or openly without a hint of embarrassment. She has also on occasion watched a boy walk out of her classroom with a full-on tent, and the mother in her has wanted to rush over and hand him a folder or a book to cover himself, which of course she resists. Kiki should turn off the television and grade, but she just can't bring herself to read another essay about The Hate You Give, a book she and her students love. Reading and discussing books with her students brings Kiki actual joy. Reading their writing is another beast altogether. During mating, two flatworms, which Kiki has never heard of, engage in penis fencing, in which they try to stab each other with their two-headed penises. Yes, this is alarming and surprising to Kiki, but what really gets her is the way the Discovery Channel describes what comes next, which is that whoever manages to penetrate first and inseminate the other wins. And the loser, their words, not hers, becomes the de facto mother. Kiki considers the flatworm's hermaphroditic nature, what it might be like to have a penis alongside her vagina. Not interested. While she's had her share of penises inside of her, sleeps beside a human with a penis, and has a child with a penis, she will always find them strange and somewhat ugly. She realizes that if a man described a vagina this way, it would be viewed as misogynistic. Maybe she's biased, but vaginas just seem more organic to the human body. Kiki glances at the stack of essays beside her on the couch and feels slightly nauseated. She tells herself that it's because there's 80 of them, but also her period is a couple of weeks late and she's been putting off buying a pregnancy test. Kiki loves her son, but she's not interested in having another baby. She hated being pregnant, and she's only ever wanted a single child. Lucas, her husband, is another story. Two is perfect, he keeps telling her. Then they have each other. Kiki won't budge. Even when they were dating, she made it clear that if she had children, it would only be the one. Anders is 4, a sweet, gentle little boy who loves animals and has the palate of an adult. She loves him more than anything in the world, which is why she only ever wanted one child. How could she possibly love another child as much as she loves Anders? On television, a hen squawks and does its strange head-bobbing run across a farmyard, a fat rooster in hot pursuit. Kiki watches as the rooster, who, just for the record, seems both predatory and peremptory, mounts the hen. She knows she's anthropomorphizing, and the rooster is just following his biological urges. But watching him mount that hen makes her mad. Some of that anger dissipates when the Aussie host of the show shares that a hen can eject up to 80% of an offending, again, their words, not hers, male sperm. She silently cheers on the hen, eject, eject, eject. Once again, the Discovery Channel disappoints when it underscores that this ejection of sperm allows for the possibility that the hen might be impregnated by a rooster at the top of the pecking order. Is it so possible that a hen just doesn't want to get impregnated again? The TV host did, after all, describe hens who eject sperm as enraged or possibly disappointed. Why assume she's disappointed the rooster isn't distinguished enough, too low in the pecking order? Why not focus on the possibility that the hen is enraged at the rooster's audacity, at the prospect of laying another bunch of eggs, with the idea of being, yet again, an incubator? Kiki clicks off the television and puts aside her stack of essays. She slings her purse over her shoulder and grabs her keys. At the pharmacy down the street, she selects 2 pregnancy tests. Sitting awkwardly on the toilet, trying to pee on the stick but not her hand, harder than it might sound, Kiki thinks about the flatworms, wonders if her husband would be so gung-ho about 2 kids if he lost their battle and became the de facto mother. Okay, the next story I'm going to read is called 5 Things You Should Know About Number 5. 1, she is called 5 because she is the 5th child of 12. And lest you think this is sad or somewhat neglectful, know that it is not uncommon in Vietnamese culture to call people by their birth order number like a nickname. 5 is the smartest of the children, which means she earns the most rides in her father's American convertible. Her father drives the only Chevy Bel Air convertible in all of Phnom Penh, where he moved from Vietnam long before she was born. As she drives through the city with him, the wind whips her black hair around her face, and 5 pretends she's in the movies, that James Dean is driving her to a beach where they'll spread a blanket and watch surfers crest crashing swells. James will offer her a cigarette, and she'll inhale expertly, exhale perfect rings that float above them toward the clouds. 5's fingers twitch slightly, maneuvering the imaginary cigarette as her father's convertible floats like a barge towards his club, where she always orders Coca-Cola and French fries. 5 loves all things American, the movies, the food, the jeans, the language, and the men who she believes are all lean and blue-eyed like James Dean. Number 5 leaves Cambodia to study in Europe. She says goodbye to the beautiful White House she's lived in all of her life. Goodbye to the enormous silk cotton tree that looms over the back garden. Goodbye to the cook who always sneaks the children a spoonful of condensed milk before bed. 5 says goodbye to her girlfriends and promises to write them, even though she's grown tired of them and is ready to move on. Goodbye to her siblings who are still young enough to be at home. Number 6 through 12 line the driveway like the palm trees whose massive green fronds sway overhead. She hugs each of them, and when she gets to number 12, who is only 9, she holds him for a beat longer than the rest and slips chocolate wrapped in gold foil into his small hand. Finally, she says goodbye to her parents. Her father beams, his wide grin both joyful and proud. Her mother lightly taps her fisted hands against the sides of her legs, something she does when she's nervous. 3. 5 will not see her parents for almost a decade. In that time, she will finish with university, fall in love with an American man who is lean, blue-eyed, and studying in Madrid at the same time as her. She will follow her James Dean to America, where, no matter what her story, people will assume she's a war bride. 5 and her James Dean will eventually move to a suburb of a large city, where their neighbors will cross the street when they see her strolling the neighborhood with her husband after dinner. The next time 5 sees her parents, they will have lost everything: their home, her father's practice, their country. But worst of all, they will have lost 2 of her brothers in the war, number 6 and 7, who loved to hide in the massive branches of the cotton silk tree when it was time for homework, whose laughter 5 can still hear echoing from the treetop. The next time 5 sees her parents, they will be in a one-room apartment outside of Paris, the last stop after they walked for days through a jungle in order to be loaded onto a plane and flown to a country that had colonized their own so many years before. 4. When the neighbor's daughter spits on one of 5's daughters and calls her a dirty chink, 5 and her husband move the family to a different suburb where people don't use racial slurs but continuously mistake 5 for her children's nanny, looking past her in stores and addressing her eldest daughter as if she is in charge. During the day, 5 takes care of her children. She cuts vegetables for dinner, sweeps the floors. She reads to the youngest 2 and then falls asleep with them during nap time, dreams she is eating rambutan with her sisters in the garden behind her childhood home. The juice runs over her fingers and drips down her chin. The fruit is so sweet, her sisters chatter so sharp, that when 5 wakes up, it takes her a minute to realize where she is. Her youngest child has wet the bed. 5 will never go back to Cambodia or Vietnam, though she has the chance. There's nothing left for me there, she tells her husband. Instead, she takes her children to visit her parents in their tiny apartment outside of Paris, the apartment they live in until they die. When they are young, her children sleep there on small cots borrowed from one of 5 sisters who live nearby. 5 sets up the children's cots between her grandparents' twin beds and sets up her own in the small, narrow kitchen. Her mother burns incense in a small altar with the few pictures she still has of 6 and 7 and leaves a mango on the altar until its musky flesh rots. 5's father bends over his desk, cramped at the foot of his bed, and examines a map of Asia, traces his finger across the page. 5's children complain about the smallness of the apartment, their boredom. She looks into their brown eyes, so similar to her own, but sees nothing of herself in them. In 3 weeks, she will fly back to the States with her kids, back to her husband, back to their house in the suburbs where nobody looks like her. Flying above the ocean, her children finally asleep beside her, 5 will look out the window, think about all of the places she has left in the world, and consider the strange comfort of hurling hundreds of miles per hour so high above the earth. And the last piece I'm going to read is called A Woman of Appetites. A woman of appetites. She was always hungry, so when Adeline ate her beautiful baby boy, no one was surprised. Not her husband or the friends who commented relentlessly on her appetite. Look how she eats. Where does it go? They exclaimed with delight and horror. Her legs, they must be hollow. You're insatiable, her husband often claimed, sprawled naked across wrinkled sheets. You just can't get enough, can you? He smiled proudly with such statements, and it was true. She couldn't get enough of anything. She was hungry, couldn't be helped. When the baby came, Adeline knew she was in trouble. The tiny boy was utterly delectable, his fat, juicy cheeks, the velvety, soft soles of his feet, the whispery tickle of his eyelashes against her breasts when he nursed. She kissed his small belly, his dimpled knees and elbows, his fuzzy scalp, his peachy bum, his tiny curled toes. She would have kissed his eyeballs if it were easier. The husband enjoyed these displays of motherly love, especially since they did nothing to dampen her appetite for him. If anything, his wife's appetites had grown since giving birth. In the middle of the night, just hours after they had fucked, she'd climb on top of him demanding more, and yet more upon waking. He joked he'd have to outsource to meet her demands. When Adeline laughed and said she'd supplement as needed, the husband became just the slightest bit anxious. When he came home to find her astride their neighbor Sid, he was more relieved than angry, though. It's true what they say, he thought as he watched her bucking against his friend. It takes a village. Between kissing her baby and fucking her husband and the occasional neighbor, Adeline ate and Adeline read, heaping spoonfuls of peanut butter straight from the jar as she devoured a fat tome on geography and the rise of first world countries. Towering sandwiches that toppled over when she set them down to turn the pages of Anna Karenina. Steak that she ate without cutting, straight from the pan, just a rare hunk speared by her fork, the easier to eat while reading timeless tales of gods and heroes. So it really came as no surprise to anyone that Adeline woke up one morning and ate her baby. She began as she always began every morning, swinging her little munchkin up from his crib to the changing table and cooing to him as she changed his diaper. Then Adeline kissed him from the soles of his feet to his wispy crown of hair, not realizing until he was gone that she had actually gobbled him whole. You weren't supposed to do that, cried her husband, though he'd known it was bound to happen. But of course I know that, she shouted. I was just so hungry it couldn't be helped. And with that, she turned on her heel, grabbed a jar of peanut butter from the pantry, and settled onto the couch with a tattered copy of Bad Behavior. How could you? He continued to cry. The woman paused and shook her peanut butter covered finger at him. Let it go, or I'll eat you too. When the husband brought up the baby again, Adeline swallowed him up in one gulp. Silence at last, she thought, and drove to the library to check out more books. When the neighbors realized what had happened, that she'd eaten not just her baby, but her husband as well, they whispered, how could she? And what kind of woman does that to her family? I know she has a big appetite, they exclaimed, but how much does she need? Since Sid, Betsy, Michael, Anastasia, Eduardo, and several others were benefiting from Adeline's sexual appetite, these whispers never grew to the roar they might have. Plus, they knew what had happened to Jackson and Sally, Adeline's nosy neighbors who liked to peek at her over the backyard fence and who hadn't refrained from openly judging her. Adeline ate them, one right after the other, with barely a pause after swallowing Jackson, who many considered to be morbidly obese. In addition to devouring foods and books and the occasional neighbor or two, Adeline had taken to riding her bike for hours at a time. She liked to load up a backpack with cheese, baguettes, jars of cornichons and olives, and cycle out far enough to where the roads turned to gravel and she could count fence posts and hear birds. When she got tired, she'd stop on the side of the road and eat everything in her pack. Sometimes she read a book. More often than not, she'd move off the road into a field next to it and fall asleep. And this is how Adeline came to wake up one day to a man hovering above her with a wolfish smile that opened to say, you know, you could run into trouble out here alone, lady. And, Adeline replied. His jeans were horribly tight, and with his legs spread above her, she marveled that the denim didn't split at the seam. And, he repeated. She noticed an unsightly vein pulsing in his forehead. Well, who knows what could happen? Someone could hurt you. Hurt me how? Adeline sat up and gently pushed on the man's legs so he'd back up and give her some room. When he grabbed her wrist tightly, she opened her mouth so wide that her jaw popped loudly, momentarily surprising the man before she polished him off. She lay back on the grass, caressing her full belly. Her neighbors thought her a gluttonous monster, an insatiable demon lover. She laughed to herself, at them. Who are they to judge her? Who's to say her appetites weren't bountiful rather than gluttonous? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Yasmina. That was fantastic. All of them were great. Yeah, she's my favorite lady, maybe ever. That's awesome. Okay. So I have the pleasure of introducing our third reader, Ananda Lima. She is the author of Motherland from Black Lawrence Press, winner of the Hudson Prize. Her work has appeared in the American Poetry Review, Poets.org, Kenyon Review Online, Gulf Coast, Pleiades, and elsewhere. She has been awarded the inaugural Work in Progress Fellowship by Latinx in Publishing, sponsored by Macmillan Publishers, for her fiction manuscripts. She has an she has an MA in linguistics from UCLA and an MFA in creative writing from Rutgers, New York. Please welcome Ananda.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you all, like at Salon Chicago, for having me. This is such a lovely series, and it's great to be a part of it. I'm in a van, and everybody's sleeping, so they're gonna wake up now, which is great. But I held off for as long as possible, which is great. I'm going to read a few poems, and I'll start with this one that I wrote after. I don't know if you've seen a graph going around in Twitter about what people supposedly the most common dreams in different countries. And it was like a world's map. And then the top roughly was falling teeth. And and then the bottom, like the global south roughly, was snakes. So this is after that. Alleged list of most common dreams by country. Half of the world dreams of teeth, the other of snakes. I dream of neither or both. A little snake lives coiled in my throat. Sometimes it zigs and zags between my teeth. When I told my friends I clenched them, my teeth in my sleep, they said in turn, me too, me too. I wonder what they dream, these American women of mine. Do they follow the map or serpentine away to another place, another subject? These days, I have a hard time staying asleep, and I have a hard time staying awake. All right. Now I have this poem. This is totally optional, so organizers don't worry. But if I can share my screen and I'll click, and if it doesn't work, I'll just skip the screen sharing. Let me see. I think I can. So good. There you go. Can everybody see my picture? Yep, perfect. So this is just an acrostic poem,
Yep,
so I thought I
we
may
can.
as well. Perfect. So I may as well show you the photograph. So this is a photographer, B.A. Van Size, and he had this project that he paired up with poets. He had about 2 years of photographs, mostly during the pandemic, and we sort of each picked one. And I love this one. I love many photographs, but this one sort of kept coming back to me. So I wrote about it. And then after staring at it for a while, I noticed that it reminded me, this thing here in the middle reminded me of this, which I thought was very lovely. And the poem is Delivery. And it has a shape, so I thought I may as well show you. All right, Delivery. On the photograph, I see what I was not seeking. God in the outstretched arm, the reach, the almost touch. I can almost remember how it was, almost all of us together in hunger for each other. Parto is the noun for delivery in Portuguese, as in child, not pastrami sandwich. At the center of the frame, almost turning the corner, I see her hungry, like God hungers for giving his languid creation breath. In her cloud, halo, drapery of stickers, she stretching, he masked in her likeness. Parto is also a verb, to leave in the first person or to divide. God knows what it's like to be lonely too. There you go. So I thought, I didn't know if the sharing would work, but I thought if it did, I may as well have another poem that is a little bit visual following this one, but I don't have it. So let me see if it's here somewhere. There you go. Um, so yeah, this poem, like I have a lot of poems about this. I have this visual condition called amblyopia, which is lazy eye, and I have it very mildly, but my son has it very severely. So it's been a very sort of trippy time with that, and both my giving it to him and also realizing that a lot of things that I thought were part of my quirky personality might be related to this. Amblyopia. I close my right eye, me olho direito, and see everything. Tudo que my mother, my father, meus pais didn't know to do then. Not a matter of laziness, the doctor says. It's more of a suppression, a lack of focus. Think of the right eye as a bully. Think of the left eye as too weak to fight. Think of the two eyes unable to work right together. And I was left, grown, done with the plasticity of a body that is still building. A gift said not to last, and I was left with the speckled Super 8, the grainy film, the faint dark surface of an old mirror. All right, then I'll stop sharing because these are the more visual ones. And I think with this poem, because it has this sort of inheritance theme and my son, I think that's a good jump to motherland. So I'll read a couple of poems from motherland. And this one is kind of my introduction poem to motherland because I think it captures a lot of the themes in the book. And it's called Line. I inherited from my mother the knobbly joints and square ends of my fingers. From my father, I got the habit of biting my nails. Their shortness, the frayed missing skin, had never bothered me. But now I have a son, and he has begun to bite too. In America, I learned that I can snap a rubber band against my wrist each time my hand reaches up towards the mouth. On the back of my hand, the rubber band disappears into the color of my skin. But when I turn and face the inner side, it is a clear division of my body. The first time I saw a cotton tree, I found it beautiful. The cotton, so white in its brown cradle, so soft against the square tips of my fingers. I squeezed the dead flower around it and felt joy from hearing it crackle. As children, we had cups full of sugar cane. We chewed on it and spit out the bagasse. Toothless men ran the noble stalks through a machine. The juice trickled into our glasses, and the flat piece that came out on the other side was put through it again until everything was gone. The dry split stalk thrown into a pile, limp like blonde hair. When I first arrived in America, I didn't understand what people meant when they said with an American accent that they were Irish or Italian or French. Now that I understand, I asked my mother for a family tree. She said she had never thought of such things. and she wouldn't know much past her grandmother's first name. So what I have is my memory of the faces of my relatives and my own. When I first arrived in America, all I could see was beauty. The snow, fine like sugar, white like cotton. But now the beauty, the land, the tired metaphors just make me sad. Before I left for America, I saw an individual in the mirror. But today I see my father, my mother, my brothers, my son, and a man missing skin from tears on his back, and the man who did it. When I looked this morning, I tugged on my rubber band so hard that it broke. All right, so I'll read a couple more. So let's see which one. I'll read this one that is kind of like a sister poem to the one I just read. I have like about three that I think the same poem, but in a different angle. And this one is called Aurelio. And this one I wrote after a party. So I was at a party and we were talking about the letter A, as one does in parties, right? And somebody was telling me about how the letter A came from sort of a head of a cow or ox. And then when I was walking home, I was thinking of in Brazil, you know, my parents are from the Northeast, and the biggest historical recurring tragedy there is drought. And the picture is usually sort of a cow's carcass on the cracked soil. And I thought of my name with the three heads staring at me, and I wrote this poem. And it's called Arroyo. They say the first letter of my name evolved from a picture of a carcass, a cabeça de vaca sem as suas costelas expostas like claws or jaws ancient. My neighbor says not to let my son sleep on my bed, but I do. I know the terror. At night, we're haunted by my great grandparents, dry on cracked soil, beating in the cold of my feet, na bahia, and the bones they inhabit on my bed. In America, I learned that arroyos are paths carved by the rain, but I already knew. At night, the cracked soil calls for me, as cabeças de vaca of my greats, calling and calling. I tell them, I don't know you, but I do. The city's spine is a split bifurcation solidified in calcium. In America, they eat the bagasse of oranges and say my name means bliss. I am in love with bone white concrete. The spine of the city sits fleshless and free of scales, flexible bones that can bend and keep bending and keep bending and bending right up until they snap. All right, so I think I'll close with this one. So this one is one of those sort of early pandemic poems, you know, like sort of April, May 2020. I don't know, it's sad, but also, I don't know, learning to deal with it. And it's called Morning. I dreamed I was a Spanish onion, no, red. And when I sliced myself above the eyebrows, my insides were white. So orderly, my structure, concentric, the circles of the dead trees. These days, I wake aching. You never know if it's due to age or pandemic. Can't remember when it started. I don't cut onions anymore. Can't take that smell lingering on my fingers. I try to be gentle with my eyes. Now, when I stand by the sink, is to hear the soft crescendo of water filling glass and think of when you slice it the other way, how it can look like the red inside muscles on a thigh. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was just beautiful, Ananda. I love how you talked about body still building and the plasticity, if I'm saying that right. Just wonderful, wonderful work. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying your book. Our next reader is Emily Maloney. Emily Maloney is the author of Cost of Living, an essay collection now out from Henry Holt, about her transformation from patient into EMT and in the pharmaceutical world, set against the backdrop of the failure of the American healthcare system. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, Glamour, Virginia Quarterly Review, The Atlantic, the North American Review, and the American Journal of Nursing. She has also worked as a dog groomer, a pastry chef, general contractor, tile setter, catalog model, and has sold her ceramics at art fairs. She has nonverbal learning disability, a neurological-based developmental disability similar to autism. Her essay, Cost of Living, which originally appeared in the Virginia Quarterly Review, was selected for Best American Essays 2017. Edited by Leslie Jameson. Emily is also a MacDowell Fellow in 2017, 2018, and a 2019 Illinois Arts Council Fellow, as well a 2015 graduate of the University of Pittsburgh MFA program. She lives in Evanston, Illinois, yes, with Ori Feinberg and their dog, Millie. Please welcome Emily Maloney.
Thank you. I think that's the first time that anyone has ever read my website bio aloud. So that's kind of like, because I have like a bio for the back of the book, and that's what I'm used to hearing. But it was great. It's very informative.
I like the bio. It's good. Yes.
Anyway, I'm going to be reading a little bit from Cost of Living. Yeah, I'm just gonna, I'm setting a timer so I have a sense of where I'm at. This essay is called Soft Restraints. The woman blew in on a Thursday, early into second shift. It was late spring. Things had begun to heat up outside and in the ER, a kind of June panic that meant admissions increased as the temperature rose. Spring fever, the nurses called it. I had been working in the ER for a few months by now, where patients flowed through the premises with some degree of repetition and regularity. These were patients who saw us as a kind of checkpoint between here and there, a middle ground. One of the hospitals in the area was great for having a baby. Another had a helipad and seemed to get all the trauma cases. We were the ones with the locked psychiatric ward. She seemed less a person and more a force, in her late 20s, light brown hair, blue eyes, medium build, and when I first saw her, thrashing up and out of the bed as if in seizure. By then, I had some experience dealing with patients, and she seemed no different at first, just louder and harder to understand. When you see someone on the worst day of their life, it is hard to know what to say or do, but you learn because there are so many of them, and they are all having the worst days of their lives. In a sense, most of the ER was about worst days. If they felt better, they would be at their own physician's office or at home or buying bags of frozen peas in the grocery store. This was a woman I could see buying frozen peas. I thought of her pink manicured hand dropping the bag into her cart. Maybe her name was Elizabeth. Elizabeth thrashed and cursed. "Don't touch me," she screamed at our charge nurse, Ellie, who was trying to start an IV. The ER was laid out in an oval with a ring of rooms on its perimeter and the nursing station and the doctor's desks inside. Katya, the other ER tech, and I stood at the edge of the ring, leaning up against the counter that separated the station from the hallway, directly across from room 14. Elizabeth kept kicking and screaming. She wasn't sorry. She didn't care what our charge nurse had to say. She would not submit to a talk screen, thank you very much. And she was disinterested in voluntarily participating in whatever we had on offer, which in this case involved restraints. So she kicked and screamed some more, while Katya and I watched from the hallway. Katya was practical, even-tempered, career-minded. She was going to go to medical school eventually, once she retook the MCAT and scored well enough to get in. She had been a tech for years, working as one created an important but temporary space between childhood and the rest of her life. She had lots of experience working with lots of patients and had also worked at hospitals much scarier than ours. I don't want to go in there, Katya said, a little under her breath. I'd reached this part of my life unexpectedly. I hadn't anticipated ever becoming an adult, and yet somehow I was legally of age and expected to get along in the world. I had some vague idea of becoming a doctor too, but that was hard to explain to others at 22 when they found out I had half an English degree and none of the pre-med requirements completed except as audits or withdrawals on my transcripts. I had tried to enroll in chemistry or biology, but the work of those classes was far beyond the reach of my abilities. The classes were huge amphitheaters of teaching, and if you were late, there were not enough seats, and so you'd have to sit in the hall, which compounded my problem. I tried taking a class at the community college, but that moved too quickly and without the necessary pauses so I could understand what was being said. The labs were full of people who seemed to know intuitively what to do, how to pour the alcohols, to light the Bunsen burner without incident. A flick of the wrist here, some neatly copied equations there, in graph paper notebooks. I kept taking these classes even though I had no hope of passing. It was like this. I liked to pretend I could do it. And becoming an EMT still felt possible, made me feel closer to bodies, science. Being an EMT, or at least an ER tech, offered me a kind of legitimacy. In emergency situations, there are two types of restraints, hard and soft. Hard restraints are the stuff of television, the story of the patient sitting up and biting or striking a resident with an open mouth or a closed fist. It's the part of the show where the attending swears at a patient. They're locked with a key affixed with a magnet to the Pyxis at the nursing station. What most people don't realize is that it's soft restraints, white, padded, and Velcroed, that are used most frequently, mostly for patients who are at risk of something happening to them. These are the patients who injure themselves by crawling out of bed or falling, or perhaps they have end-stage dementia, and they can't help but pull out their IV to spray blood around the room and spatter the privacy curtain drawn between patients. Patients who fiddle with bandages or who scratch where they shouldn't get soft restraints. For nearly everyone, we give them the benefit of the doubt. Usually we start with soft restraints and then move to hard should the situation warrant. There are rules. With Elizabeth, it seemed like we would have to immediately up our game. There had been other patients before Elizabeth that day. I worked mostly on the fast track side of the emergency department, saw kids with kids, orthopedic injuries, new mothers who needed reassurance that the pediatric Tylenol was correctly dosed, men who had removed fingers in meat slicers, toddlers who had faced brick walls or concrete sidewalks and lost, split open a forehead or scalp and needed sutures or staples to put everything back together again. Earlier in our shift, a Muslim woman came in with a rash on her face that might have been lupus. It was never lupus, and that here it was, butterfly stretched across her face, the top of each wing swooping to touch her hijab. Once we stopped laughing in the hallway at how strange it was, our gallows humor, like from an episode of House, someone went in and informed the patient, who was told to see her primary care physician immediately, and if she didn't have one, that we'd find her one. She insisted I stay with her whenever our PA, who was male, examined her, and wasn't comfortable with a full exam in any case, so I was the one who took her temperature and blood pressure and touched her. I wanted to feel awful for laughing, but none of us did, not really. We laughed because people kept dying, and if you were not having a heart attack or a stroke or maybe had a broken arm or needed sutures, we typically did not know what to do with you. The lupus was so easy, for once, a relief, a diagnosis smacking us in the face. But by then, midway through the afternoon, the woman with lupus had been discharged, and so we waited for the next drama to slide through our doors. I occupied the world of the physically well then, or I thought I did. I'd not yet been told my thyroid had stopped working or that the lithium I was taking had likely hastened its demise. That would come a year later. There was no autoimmune asthma diagnosis then, no concerning liver results, no vomiting every time I got my period, no inflammation markers in my labs, no pain in the morning that radiated from my joints and muscles and ran down my arms or legs. Elizabeth wasn't assigned to me, but I knew her from before, from prior worse days. She was what we called a frequent flyer, someone who was unable to make sense of the world she lived in, and so she came to us instead, a kind of tent revival in our suburban hospital for healing. She had been previously diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and fibromyalgia and had a history of drug dependence. And some sort of digestive ailment, because everything was and is related to the gut, though few people treated patients with this in mind. Mark, the physician assigned to her, was not one of these types of practitioners. The fact that Elizabeth had fibromyalgia alone meant nobody in the ER was about to take her seriously. It was a made-up diagnosis for us then, a kind of early aughts placeholder for female hysteria. I too had a problem with being taken seriously. Not here exactly. Here I showed up for my shifts on time, learned the give and take of conversation, how to address patients, heard their stories, wrote down what drugs they took, performed EKGs, and drew blood. And my job was time limited. The cost of doing business never lasted longer than a shift. But I was odd. I had difficulty understanding when I should speak and how far away to stand from someone else. When I interviewed for this job or any job, it was a kind of performance. I made great first impressions, but for those who got to know me, I might let my mask slip and could be intense in a way that some found off-putting. Here was another strangeness. I flapped my hands when excited or nervous or sometimes out of frustration, but mostly I did not know where to put myself. In a strange way, I believed I understood how Elizabeth's tragedy unfolded day after day. The night I showed up at Mercy Hospital, Iowa City, how I barely remembered the nurse who cared for me, the tech, how the pair forced my arm away from my mouth and administered 2 charcoal lavages. I remembered the second one. I was conscious then. For them, it was another shift, this life-saving work, and for me, it was the last day of something and the first day of something else. Elizabeth stopped for a minute and looked up at Ellie, the charge nurse who was speaking to her. I had turned away by then. I had other things to do, drawers to stock, patients' drug lists to inventory. The man in 6 had just brought in an Altoids tin full of pills and had dumped it on the side table, and I had been tasked with finding out what all those drugs were and what he was taking them for. But Elizabeth in bed 14 wouldn't stop thrashing. This was an act, it seemed. Everything sublimated to the performance. We had been drafted as Elizabeth's audience, and we were here for something stark and unimaginable, something fierce. The charge nurse was there to bear witness, or maybe the patient was possessed. Years from now, I will glamorize this situation, this moment. Maybe she is blonde after all, or maybe she is wearing makeup or not. I can't say now. It's hard to know for sure. I want her to know that we all saw her. I was tempted to touch her to see if she was, in fact, real, but the charge nurse wouldn't let me in, not after what happened. She's not your patient, Ellie said, which was fine in some ways and felt untrue in others. She might be my patient, I thought. She might be me. I'm going to stop there.
Emily, that was amazing. It was so moving. And I just wanted to hear more. I wanted to read the book. Thank you so much. Really, very appreciated. Well, I have the pleasure, the honor of introducing our last reader, David Allen Sullivan. He is a California poet laureate, and his books include Strong-Armed Angels, Every Seed of the Pomegranate, and also a book of co-translation with Abbas Kadim from the Arabic of Iraqi Adnan al-Sayyi. Bombs have not breakfasted yet, and Black Ice. Most recently, he won the Mary Ballard Chapbook Poetry Prize for Take Wing and published Black Butterflies Over Baghdad with Word Works books. He teaches at Cabrillo College, where he edits the Porter Gulch Review with his students. He lives in Santa Cruz with his family. It's a great, great pleasure to have him with us tonight. So David, take it away. It's all yours.
Thank you, Natalia.
Yes.
Thank you, all the readers. Thanks, Alice and Yasmina. If you haven't published the Woman of Extraordinary Appetites, I would love that one. And Ananda, wonderful. And Emily, yeah, you brought me back to when my father had a car accident and spending nights in the ICU with him and having people pull out the tubes, draining the blood fluid in their heads. And yeah, the intensity of those experiences. So thank you all. Actually, I'm going to put in the chat my website and a connection, the email for Portugal to Review, if anyone wants to look online at that literary review. I'd love to see your work and publish it. I'm going to jump back to my second book and read one poem, and then the rest will be from the new book that just got published. I teach at a community college here, and I was teaching the Gilgamesh epic and having students write about somebody they'd lost. And I got these very powerful pieces by veterans from Afghanistan and the Iraq War. And I began to write about the war and began to listen to my students. And halfway through, I realized if I was going to do that, I had to figure out the Iraqi viewpoints. So I'm just going to read one poem from my second book. This is called Every Seed of the Pomegranate. And just to give you an idea of trying to give voice to someone, this is Patricia Maravilloso, waitress. Before they sent home this uniform, they washed it in one of those big military rigs. Some kind of lemony bleach disguises his smell. Where's the goddamn dirt? The blood. I see shrapnel burrow. His hands press against holes. Maybe he bleeds out a prayer. I place hands where he placed his. Want it to have been a sucking wound, something the doc can work with. And when I finished that book, I'd become friends with a number of Iraqi artists and poets. And Black Butterflies Over Baghdad, which just came out, is a response to that. The cover is actually from a Iraqi poet now living in LA, an artist in LA, Ghassan Gaid. And this one deals really with the aftermath of the war. So this is mostly all in Iraqi voices. And a lot of it deals with artwork. So Ananda, was nice to share a screen and talk about ekphrastic poetry, because I'll show some images as well. The first one I'll show is from the first poem in the book. And it's me trying to, this was given to me by an Iraqi friend, no identifiers. But the poem sprung from that, and it's about me kind of looking at myself and the danger of violence born, the danger of trying to tell other people's stories, and trying to do so respectfully. So this is called Mosul Birthday, based on a photograph an Iraqi friend sent me. Come to these rooms festooned with light. See how they've removed the roofs and most of the walls. Birthday streamers are draped in high enough to avoid entanglement, and balloons bounce in winds. The blast popped only a few. Pull one down. See how long you and your documentary crew can keep it aloft. The floor's cracked plates could cut your feet. Even the body counts well hidden, except from those who knew their names, accepted Amal's birthday invitation. Where's the boy who was born on this day? He's that mark on the far wall beneath that black balloon. Never knew what hit him. elegant to have those who would have mourned hardest die with him. And another artist shared a series of works with me, all based on heads, variations on it. Let's see if I can get it up here. Huh.
There you go.
It didn't show up for you? On my screen, it didn't. You got the headshot? A series of heads and hands on blue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Getting to know Iraqis, they've been wonderfully open and just incredibly generous with their time, telling me lots of stories, often laced with really severe Black humor. And this is, I went and visited in Salt Lake City, an interpreter who now lives there with his family. And this describes it in the poem. It's just called Lost, Found. Up late with Yusef Al-Tamimi, former interpreter now living in Salt Lake City with his family. As the last candles pool, I ask, what's the hardest thing you saw? He'd been called to Camp Taji's main gate about a suspicious package a woman was carrying. When he arrived, she was clutching a crimped over paper bag to her chest, and the men were yelling at her with their AKs. He made them stand down, then approached, asked what she had. She slowly unrolled it. Inside, the head of her son. She was asking the American soldiers to help look for the body so she could bury him properly. Yusuf says, as she talked, she continued to stroke her son's hair. Yeah, it's kind of astonishing. I'm still trying to convince Yusuf to write his memoir. He was in the Republican Guard briefly, then he became a translator for the American soldiers. And then he was so angered at the behavior by the American soldiers, he began to work and translate for Amnesty International and other groups. And in the middle of this book are a number of co-translations that I undertook with Iraqis. I don't speak Arabic. I've never been to Iraq. And I've done these mostly with Abbas Kadim, sometimes with the poet themselves. And I'm just going to read a couple of these. The first one, I'll show you a picture of Jamil al-Jamil. Do you see a man with tape over his mouth?
Yes, we do.
Okay. This is Jamil al-Jamil. Yeah, briefly, he had to go to refugee camp with his family. He's from Mosul. He's Christian. When he came back from the camp, his house had been destroyed, probably because of his Christian background. He at first asked me on Skype if I could help him get out of the country. And now he says he wants to stay and fight to make a better Iraq that's more inclusive. This is one of his poems. It's called Just Answer the Questions. We've returned to our village where the doors of our houses are braided with questions. Church streets as narrow as our pockets, the proverbial rich can't needle through. We have a shop that sells shoes to cushion us from the harsh silence, but people still cry like professional cloud controllers. Yes, we're back home. The village is spread out on a bolt of cloth decorated like soldiers' uniforms, but the grocer manipulates the price of greens. The baker cheats with brown flour, and only the military buy up everything, smiling at salesmen offering machetes and opinions. Pedestrians are idle, chastened by noisy speculation. They retreat to cafes to talk of their heroines. Someone says, my tent was full of paste and white oil and endless boxes of asylum stolen from my hometown. The UN relief organization rebuilds hospitals, distributes biscuits, but they can't brighten our wan faces, even when the beautiful staffers flirt while feigning work. When I pass them on the street, I inhale their heady smell. We repeat, give us our daily bread. Our bodies recycle waste, and we dispense civil greetings as we open our arms to give blood or lessons at makeshift school tables. A woman who pretends to be a refugee distributes questionnaires. The whole camp dogs her as if we were a small village. Every day she draws up forms for us to fill in, and every day we do our duty. That's from Jamil Al-Jamil. The next one is, and the last co-translation I'll do is one from Kadem Kanhar. Image of a man looking through a bullet hole in glass. Thank you.
Yes.
And this is kind of the black humor. It's just astonishing how full of life, how committed to changing Iraq, and how able to laugh at very dark things I've found Iraqis to be. This is called You Cannot Retrieve Your Deceased Because, : 1, we don't know which bodies belong to you and which ones belong to them. And seeing as there aren't any heads. 2, there's a generation of wild dogs that grew up finding human flesh palatable. 3, when you are the only living body among the dead, the line thins between death and life. 4, what does it mean to drag a body out from under a carpet of flies? 5, one day, in the distant future, there will be a news item about archaeologists who discover evidence of people who buried their dead piled on each other in one pit. They'll speculate about the existence of a headless human species with hands contorted behind their backs. It will be a minor news item. 6, why do you think we import bulldozers? 7, you can put headstones anywhere, roofs, streets, sidewalks, or on our backs. 8, we both know the rifle is an empty cup as we race to pour our hate into it. 9, we close the door on our fingers as we step down into our separate graves. I said darkly funny. Kadim is suffering from heart conditions. This is common among young Iraqis, that they are suffering health. I think about the weathering that they're going through. I have not heard from Kadim in a while. I would really love to do a selected poems, and we've talked about it. His suggestion was we alternate poems and not put names on either of them, which I would love to do with him sometime, but right now I don't have contact with him. This is one in a single sentence. It's for Hussan Abdul Khalik. He's the one who sent me this video clip. The title's the first line. My Iraqi friend sends me a repeating video clip that shows a masked man on a gray choked street walking among smoke canisters that burn like angry eyes. And when a fresh one comes bouncing towards him without missing a beat, he steps back and back heel kicks it like a soccer ball. So the gray streak arcs over the police barricade. And for those 20 seconds that loop and loop and loop, it seems easy to throw back all they throw. And I'm not sure why, but I've erased the clip, so I can't show you the clip that I saw that was based on. I think I'll just read 2 more. One is based on a print given to me by Rokia Hazim. She's young, she's 21 years old. She was on Tahrir Square as they've done the various protests against the corruption in the government, against the way they've been treated. And this is a piece based on the first martyr of the uprising as they try to change things. It's described in the poem, but basically the police, the Iraqi police, shot gas canisters, not over the heads of the protesters, but directly at the head of this person, the first one who died in the protests. It's called Shahada, based on a broadsheet sent to me by Rakeya Hazid. The print is so carefully detailed, I can make out the Pepsi insignia on the can of soda his left hand grips, and in his right read a leaflet whose Arabic proclaims peaceful protest. But his feet hang in midair, no context, street background, or sign of where he is, just his levitating form. Toes of shoes point down as he lifts up off the page, and my rising eyes catch his backward leaning chest, and then, yes, his head thrown back, chin up, and only then do I register the canister that struck his forehead, the spray of blood or gas leakage clouding the paper above him, lifting around his rising into martyrdom like an ascending saint. But this body will fall back to earth. The gas canister that struck him, aimed to take him out by Iraqi military who were sent to beat back protesters, will clank on concrete or thud on grass, while this image will enrage all. This body, dead again and again in the prints she prints and distributes. How many martyrs for a cause cause change? See the way his fingers tighten around the flyer, the way his chin points up at a sky. See how the sky's nothing but erasure? And I'll stop screen share and read the last poem in the book. This is inspired by the paintings of Sawar Baran. He still is in Iraq during the earlier dictatorship. He went to abstract painting, and now he's back painting realistically a lot about ex-soldiers or people without limbs or the women in Iraq. This is based on one of his paintings, and it's called Interrogation. It's in two voices, the interrogator, an Iraqi official, and the artist. Interrogation. Why have you hidden the man's face? The paintings of the horse, not the man. Why is his cuff frayed? Does he represent the poor? He's a farmer, he is poor. Why did you paint the horse with nostrils flared? Horses widen their nostrils when smelling. Why are its teeth bared? It's lipping up the fig from the man's hand. Why does the horse's cheek strain? Its muscles are working, extending around the brown fist of fig. You've shown the ribs in its chest. Yes, a horse has ribs. Its eye seems crazed. Crazed is in the eye of the beholder. But it looks out at the canvas, at us. While I painted, the horse noticed me. Ah, then you admit it's about duplicity. It's about a horse, a fig, a man. You've left out the artist. I try not to be in my work. So you admit you're in hiding. I admit it's a painting. Do not leave the country in case you're wanted for further inquiry. Then do not take the country from me. What was that? Or the horse, or the man. Do you want to go hungry? I want to grow kinder. Thank you all.
Thank you, David. That was really powerful and intense, but so important to hear those stories. So I just, that's the reading. I want to thank all of our readers for coming out to Zoom, Alex, Yasmina, Emily, Ananda, and David. You guys were amazing. And we appreciate you sharing with us all. For those that want to stick around, we will do a short Q&A. You can ask any of our writers anything about their work or with working it out, anything, or we can just talk. But otherwise we'll just See You in July is the next reading, and hopefully we'll be back in person at the Reveler. So yeah, does anyone have anything any reactions or questions, anything they want to say? You can just jump in.
I have